Look at this aerial footage. Sweden, Syria, July 2025. Smoke rising from a Druze city as Syrian government forces and Bedouin militias storm through the streets. Buildings burning, families fleeing. But look closer at this footage, and you'll see complications that are almost impossible to untangle. The Druze who live here, they're Syrian citizens, but their own government doesn't trust them. In Damascus, the capital they supposedly belong to, their neighbors want them marginalized, stripped of any real power or authority. They're expected to throw down their arms and follow blindly. But cross the border into Israel, and suddenly the same Druze people are trusted with the most sensitive military positions. In Lebanon, they're political kingmakers who can make or break governments. How does this same ethnic group go from being distrusted subjects in one country to elite soldiers in another, to power brokers in a third? This is a conflict that breaks all conventional logic, because the Druze relationship with these three countries, it's not just complicated, it's completely schizophrenic. Digging into this story reveals that the same Druze people, same culture, same religion, sometimes literally the same families, react to Israel in completely opposite ways, depending on which side of an invisible line they happen to live on. In Israel proper, they're the golden children, serve in the army, die for the flag, prove that Israel treats minorities well. But drive 50 kilometers north to the occupied Golan Heights, and suddenly these same Druze people are rejecting Israeli rule and refusing to take Israeli citizenship. Cross into Lebanon or Syria, Druze leaders are telling their Israeli cousins to stop serving the occupier. How is this possible? How did one people get split into such radically different political identities? The answer takes us back to a series of secret meetings in the 1930s that would reshape an entire community's fate. Picture this. It's the late 1930s, Palestine. Zionist militias are looking for allies against the Arab majority, and they've got their eyes on this mysterious group called the Druze. The Druze are perfect targets for this strategy. They're a secretive religious minority, split off from mainstream Islam 1,000 years ago, with beliefs so guarded that most Druze themselves don't know their religion's inner secrets. They've been getting beat up by mainstream Muslims for centuries. Zionist leaders figure, these guys must hate Arabs, right? They'll be our natural allies. Early Zionist planners described the Druze as having endemic animosity towards Arab Muslims and a historical affinity for Jews. Whether this was actually true didn't matter. It became the foundation of the relationship. But here's the paradox. While Zionist leaders were publicly courting the Druze, historical records show they also considered a range of options regarding Druze presence in the land. Then, 1948 happens, and everything changes. When Israel's War of Independence breaks out, something unprecedented occurs. While 750,000 Palestinian Arabs become refugees, not a single Druze village gets destroyed. But it gets weirder. Dozens of Druze soldiers who are fighting for the Arabs suddenly switch sides mid-battle and join the Israeli forces. An Israeli officer admitted they wanted to use the Druze as a strategic wedge against Arab unity. So, Israel's strategy wasn't really about friendship. It was about weaponizing the Druze against the Arab world. In 1956, Israel cuts a deal with Druze elders. They're going to impose compulsory military service on Druze men, making them the only non-Jewish citizens who have to serve in the army. In 1962, Israel goes even further. They officially reclassify the Druze as a separate ethnic nationality from Arabs. Your ID card no longer says Arab, it says Druze. With the stroke of a pen, Israel created a new identity, the non-Arab Druze. Israeli security services began informally categorizing Druze into those considered loyal and those considered less so. Terms like good Druze and bad Druze sometimes appear in security contexts. Fast forward to 1967. Israel captures the Golan Heights from Syria and kicks out almost everyone, over 100,000 Syrians, except for the Druze villages. Israel figures, these Syrian Druze will see how great life is under Israeli rule and become our local cheerleaders. They couldn't have been more wrong. For decades, these Golan Druze have been among the most stubborn resistors of Israeli rule. They keep Arabic-only street signs, refuse to speak Hebrew in public, and still ship their apples across enemy lines to Syrian markets instead of selling them in Israel. When Israel annexes the Golan in 1981, the Druze launch a 6-month general strike. Israeli troops try to enforce citizenship. The result? Out of tens of thousands, less than 20% would hold Israeli citizenship even decades later. Social exile for collaboration. So you've got this bizarre situation where Druze in Israeli Galilee are serving as army officers, while Druze 50 kilometers north are resisting Israeli authority. Which brings us to that surreal scene I showed you at the beginning. Syria's civil war has been raging for years. Israeli Druze have been watching their Syrian cousins get massacred by jihadist groups. In 2015, they mobbed an Israeli military ambulance and killed a wounded Syrian fighter, the only such incident in Israeli history. Faced with Druze fury, Israeli officials quietly promised they'd stop treating fighters from anti-Druze jihadi groups. By 2017, Israel is making open security guarantees to Syrian Druze villages in enemy territory. When al-Qaeda-linked rebels surround Syrian Druze villages, Israel announces it will intervene militarily. And then came July 2025. Syrian government forces and Bedouin militias launched that brutal assault on Sweden we saw at the beginning. Hundreds of Druze civilians massacred. The Israeli Druze response was unprecedented. About 1,000 Israeli Druze civilians spontaneously crossed into Syria to fight alongside their kinsmen. The Israeli Air Force provided support through targeted airstrikes. You've got Israeli citizens marching into enemy territory, fighting under Israeli air support in a war that isn't officially Israel's war. A retired Druze general in Israel, Amal Assad, warned that the Druze community might not stay loyal if their Syrian relatives kept getting massacred. He compared the Syrian Druze's suffering to Hamas's October 7th attack, basically equating Druze pain with Israeli pain. "I'm worried about our relationship with the state of Israel," he said, hinting at potential civil unrest from Israel's most loyal minority. So what are we looking at here? The Druze-Israel relationship isn't just about politics or geography. It's a masterclass in how borders can split the same people into completely different identities. The accident of which side of a line you were on in 1948 determined whether you became Israel's most loyal soldiers or its most defiant subjects. And as we saw in Sweden, when your family is split across enemy lines, loyalty becomes a luxury you can't always afford. Because blood, it turns out, is thicker than borders.